So just how important is setup time in board gaming? And I feel like there's two ways to approach this, and a lot depends on the storage situation. This is building from last week's podcast pushed up to my board gaming playlist here. The idea that, okay, if you bring your board game to a gaming club or the store or even your friend's house, not so much your own cave or your own domain, but transporting it, you have a set amount of time to play usually. And this could be a hard set time like, hey, the store closes at 9, you're out of here. Or it could kind of be like, we can go to like 9:30, 10, 10:30, but people are going to start mentally checking out at 10 o'clock because it's starting to get a little bit late at night. So yes, absolutely. Just like with war games, it is kind of important to take into account setup time. Arriving, putting the board out, putting the components out, building the piles, getting everything ready. That's before we draw for characters or kind of quickly explain the rules or divide up teams. So for me, the first question is, how can a game that is set up intense, set up heavy? Let's look at Gloomhaven. I love Gloomhaven, making my way through, continuing to make my way through. Frosthaven, just can't get here fast enough. That's a great example because the experience is something unique. It is something very, very unique. But the setup is crazy, simply because there's a lot of tokens and counters that you're going to utilize. You need access to the standees, the miniatures, the components. Now, you could say, well, if you know ahead of time where you're going to adventure and where the story's kind of going, maybe you can segment out a couple of those standees, so you're not going to use all of them. But then there's the tiles, the usual dungeon fare stuff. But the biggest thing is prepping and building the decks and the cards. So setup time for that is twofold. It's arriving there and setting up the components and building it, but also time spent building these decks to play. And breakdown time is also important, although things are able to break down much quicker than set up. So taking that into account and knowing, again, something like Gloomhaven where it's going to be a little more intense, you need some sort of storage solution. Now, admittedly, there are some amazing in-box storage solutions. I'm using a bunch of plastic Ziploc bags and some custom little mini cases and stuff simply because I tend to leave the game set up for a long, long time. But looking into a broken token insert or something along those lines, that's like $100. That's like a second copy of Gloomhaven or down payment on Frosthaven that you can make. But it certainly speeds the game up, and one has to consider the premium on time, where if you invest in something that USD is the similar cost of the game itself, but if it reduces it down to 15 minute setup, and it makes the game easier to go from adventure to adventure because you complete one adventure, you complete one dungeon, it's already kind of set up, everything's organized, you can quickly populate the second. There is something to be said for that. But I find that I have to take into account certain games that if I'm going to bring them to play, open play or publicly, like, hey, I'm just going to bring 5 or 6 games, let's see what we can play, it is something I have to account for. I'm playing a lot of Mage Knight right now. I feel like I've got a good handle on Mage Knight. Maybe like I'm playing it 90% correct. I'm pretty sure I'm playing it close to correct because I'm getting my butt kicked all over in the game, and I'm still learning tactics on how to play it. But that's a great example of a game that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of components. I mean, there is, but it takes a little bit longer. It's deceptive in that first you got to build the tile deck. You got to select your character. I keep those bagged separately, so the cards and the tokens are there for each character. But then building the actual item decks and the higher decks and the artifact decks, that takes a little bit of time, segmenting out the tokens. If you want to use all the expansions or not, pushing there, that is time that takes away from the game itself. So how much time do you factor, and does that make a difference? Second to that, of course, there is a little bit of time that it's going to cut down. The more you play a game, the more you set it up, the more you get used to that exact process and optimize it. But even with that, I think you can only get it down so much.